In the words of renowned contemporary poet and performer DJ Khaled, another one! Yes, this is another animation analysis of a scene from Arcane. You guys asked me to do another one, I just can't say no to you, and to be honest, I didn't particularly want to anyway, so let's do it. I chose this scene to do because it's driven by acting and emotions as opposed to the very body mechanics heavy one that I did last time of the fight scene. Now I assume that if you're watching this, you have already watched Arcane. I don't want to be the person guilty of, doing a spoiler for you or something, as well as just understanding the context behind this scene, understanding the characters' personalities and motivations, and why they're acting the way they are, and also why I found this scene so very powerful emotionally. Let's start here where Vi leaves Powder. She's just been incredibly harsh to her, which is of course understandable with what's just happened. They just lost everyone they loved because of Powder, so Vi is understandably distraught, and she blames Powder because it's her fault. We see Vi trying to hold herself together. She's already ashamed by how she's behaved towards Powder, and she needs a moment to gather herself. You can see her internal struggle here, the really quick eye dots showing the turmoil she's in right now. Eye dots often reflect mental processes and thoughts, and she's battling for some self-control. That twitching in her chin and lips and cheeks, the quick blink, and how she holds her mouth closed to try and hold her emotions in and get control over herself. Her nostrils are flared because, her breathing and heart rate has increased. She's trying instinctively to get more air in because she's in a state of high emotion. Her lip is curling slightly. These nasolabial folds are really tensed, and these are all indicators of emotional stress. They're all very subtle, and these are the touches that make Arcane so great to examine with regards to the animation, because it's all very well when you're animating someone who's sad to turn the corners of their mouth down, raise these interior points of the eyebrows, bring in some tears, but real live creatures have what's called the autonomic nervous system, which controls and regulates unconscious bodily functions like your respiratory and heart rates, pupil dilations, stuff like that. These are the tiny, easily overlooked details that really make these characters feel alive. And they're apparent in things like flared nostrils, rapid breathing, dilating or contracting pupils, stuff like that. And the animators and directors of Arcane are obviously very aware of these emotional indicators, and they're animating at a very fine-grained level. So as Vi gets up, the focus changes, and we're at this low angle with these goggles in the foreground, which are Kagor's and got knocked off when he got killed. They're cracked, got blood on them, and you have these really poignant 2 raindrops that drop onto either lens. You even hear the lonely blink blink, and it's kind of like teardrops mourning what Vi and Powder have lost. We've got a close-up of Powder flinching away from Vi as she got up, and then a shot from above of Vi walking away from Powder and Vanda's body behind them. It really drives home that feeling of abandonment and loneliness. Either way Powder turns, there's loss, with Vanda dead on one side and Vi walking away from her on the other side, and her just left there in the middle of both of them, and the camera keeps moving further away to enhance that feeling of desolation, leaving Powder looking really small down there. And high-angle camera shots like this enhance the feeling of the character being small, vulnerable, and helpless. Then a quick cut to Powder reaching towards us, so we see what Vi's turned her back on. You've got the fire behind Powder. It's like she's in hell now. She's lost everything and everyone she ever loved. The one person she thought would always be with her is abandoning her. She's reaching out as if to pull Vi back, and her movements are really quick and frantic and erratic because she's in a complete panic, and you can see her full body sobs here, and she clasps her hands to her chest as if she's trying to hold herself together and hold her pain inside because it's so big and she feels so helpless. You can see here, even though both hands come to her chest, they're careful not to have any symmetry or twinning. The hands clasping are slightly offset, so it feels organic and natural, and then her shoulders slump as she begs Vi to come back because she's realizing that Vi is not even turning around. You can see how her body reacts on the beats of Powder's emotions and words. So when she says, "Please, Violet," she reaches out towards her, entreating her, as if she could somehow reach her and bring her back, but Vi continues walking. Then as she says, "I need you," she pulls her arm back and both hands to her chest. Both hands to her chest to show she's talking about herself, and showing how important it is to her, and showing with her arms how she needs Vi with her physically, and hoping that this will persuade Vi to come back to her. And she pushes up a bit on her haunches with hope, and almost as if she's trying to get a bit closer to her, and all that wishing is so much that she can't contain it. And then when she realizes Vi is not even faltering as she walks, not even hesitating as she screams for her, she slumps down when she sobs "please," and her shoulders and entire body kind of crumple down in defeat because she's realizing that Vi is not coming back, and that really shows in her posture. As Vi turns the corner here, she throws herself against the wall as if she doesn't even have it in her to stand without support because she was just barely keeping it together enough to get that far. So she falls against the wall so hard that droplets of rain spray off her, and there's that overshoot on her head, and then it comes forward again to settle. And you can see on her face that she's in emotional agony. Her mouth is open because she's fighting to get a breath. Her shoulders are heaving as she feels the sobs coming. And it's a close-up so we can really see and feel her grief. We're right there with her. There are little touches again, like here as she sobs, there's a slight wavering in her chin. So small you probably wouldn't consciously see it, but it being there makes it all feel so much more real and authentic. She slides down the wall because she can't hold herself up anymore, and you see that by how hard she hits the ground and her legs sort of splay out and her limbs have no strength to them at all. There's that follow through on her shoulders and the rest of her body as she hits the ground. Her hand is just curled up. Her arms are just staying the way they felt because she's just completely consumed by grief that she has no mental space to think about what her body's actually doing. She sits there and sobs with her whole body. And there are these little details with the secondary action, like her hands involuntarily curling up as the waves of grief come over her. And there's a bit of a twitch in her leg, like human bodies tense up and want to curl in on themselves and go into a protective fetal position when they feel extreme emotional pain. And that's like a bit of that subconscious reaction there for her. I'm going to skip a little bit forward here to when Silco enters the scene. Powder is screaming for Vi, but Silco appears from where Vi left. It's foreshadowing that he's going to replace Vi in Powder's life, as her protector or parental or family figure. You see him walking in confidently and then he hesitates as he sees Powder there on the floor. I think this hesitation is the first crack in his armor that we see when it comes to Powder or Jinx, because maybe he's a little disarmed by how helpless and distraught she is there all alone. It wasn't what he was expecting, but then he collects himself and keeps walking towards her. We then see him come into frame from Powder's perspective, so we see the power he currently has over her, and this angle gives us a threatening edge. He's in a position of power looking down on her, and as far as we know, he's only got ill intentions towards her. And that feeling is further supported by his stone cold, impassive face, and how he's strutting sort of aggressively with his shoulders squared back like that, and how he lifts his chin as he settles, like he's looking down his nose at her. And we've got the raindrops hitting the camera lens, making it all feel more real to us, enforcing how she's lying there in the rain. He's also being hit by all that red light from the fire behind Powder, and that contrast against the grey cloudy sky and then that flash of lightning gives us a pretty ominous feeling, as well as how the light catches his one messed up eye with that glint, while the other eye has no specularity to it at all. Almost like a dead fish eye, like he has no empathy or emotions. He just looks dead inside and no expression on his face. We've got a bit of a moving hold on Silco, so the situation Powder is in can sink in, and then we can start to feel some dread. Then it cuts to her in a position of weakness. She's very vulnerable, framed here between his legs, hunched over in a puddle, with a crumpled up toy next to her and Vander's body behind her with all those flames, really adding to that feeling of complete devastation and ruin and loss. Her hands are over her head as if she can somehow protect herself from the pain of what she's feeling, and right now she's not even conscious of the fact that she may be in danger. She's totally vulnerable right now, and it would be very easy to just kill her. And that's further illustrated by the next shot of a bloody knife in Silco's hand, as his grip tightens on it very threateningly as he adjusts his grip to be able to stab her. She's still sobbing inconsolably in the next shot. She hasn't even looked up yet, doesn't even realize that Silco is standing there. She's just way too consumed with her grief, and he's just standing there watching her sob, no dialogue, and just some tense, subtle sound designs. So the tension is really building for us, and that feeling of unease is further enhanced by this camera being slightly tilted and having some very slight movement to it. Not so extreme that we would even notice it, but it adds to that feeling of discomfort. You can see as she sobs, her whole body is affected. It's not just her trunk or chest. Even her hips, legs, and feet move, and there's that nice touch with that secondary action of her arm flopping down there too. Okay, so I'm going to skim over this part of Vi noticing Silco there, silhouetted by the flames, and then as she tries to go save Powder, she gets grabbed and dragged away because I want to focus more on the nuances of the part that comes after this. Silco bends down to talk to Powder. I love how we have a moment of this moving hold where we're not quite sure what he's going to do, then the anticipation as he starts to move. First his shoulders and chest as he breathes and tenses as he decides what his next move is, the weight adjustment as he moves his way to his right foot, and we see the tip of the knife coming into screen here, reminding us of the danger. And then he steps to his left foot and his arm bends to prop on his knee as he bends down. And we still are a little unsure as to what his intentions are because that knife point dancing in and out of the frame gives us bad vibes. But then he hides the knife behind his back. So he's obviously holding on to it because he still intends to maybe use it, but he's A, not going to use it straight away, and B, doesn't want to spook her. He wants to first find out what the situation is and where Vi is. He asks Powder where Vi is, and when Powder first raises her head, we're at quite an uncomfortable angle here in an extreme close-up, so we can see how distraught she is. Her mouth pulled open and her eyes at first are pretty blank. She doesn't even look up at Silco. She first needs to come out of her own head. So it takes a moment for her eyes to actually gain focus again because she was totally out of reality for a while there. So she's first unfocused and staring at nothing, then she realizes someone was speaking to her and is standing in front of her, and her eyes dart up to Silco. We cut to this close-up 2 shot of them so we can see how she responds and interacts with him. We have that relationship or interaction between them being formed with them both in frame. And this is different than the previous 2 shot, which was at a wider angle, because this is more personal. That was at a distance and she wasn't looking at him, and her facial expressions and interaction wasn't the important thing to focus on there. But now he's come down to her level and they're in a closer frame, so it feels more personal. She's in the bottom third of the screen and he's in the top third, so we still have that power imbalance and really nice staging. Both their profiles and silhouettes are nice and clear, with him having some ominous room lighting from the fire. And from this angle, we can see both their expressions and body language really well and how she reacts to realizing he's there. So Powder is looking up at Silco now. Her head comes up in an arc to look at him and her hand goes down in a counter arc. And she's obviously surprised here because she hadn't realized he was there. She thought she was all alone. She doesn't respond at first because she's still sobbing, because obviously it doesn't stop straight away. When you've been sobbing like that, your breaths are still hitching, your body is still reacting, and she's processing this change in situation and the fact that she's no longer alone. And you see her eyes dart as she starts to be able to think again. It's not so easy to see from this angle, and they could have figured that no one would notice and just left it, but it's those tiny details that our subconscious picks up on that makes the characters feel more like real people. All these micro movements and micro expressions. When we cut back to this frontal close-up of her face, there are the eye darts as she's processing the situation she's in now. She glances up at Silco, then down again as she considers her options, of which she doesn't have many. As far as she's concerned, she's lost literally everybody. She's completely alone. And this guy's in front of her now, speaking to her in a kind way. Even though we know it's fake, she's a little kid, you know? So she's looking down, thinking, then closes her eyes as if to gather up her courage to do what she does next. And then she gets a sort of aggressive look on her face as she looks back up at Silco. And I think that's because kind of in her mind, she's thinking, fuck you to Vi. Because she knows this guy's the enemy, but she's been abandoned. So she's now made the split-second decision to latch onto the person who's here with her and speaking to her kindly. She's set her sights on Silco now to fill the role of her new companion and protector. She's totally determined now that's what he's going to be. There's that complexity of emotion going on here because nothing's ever black and white, you know, but you definitely see quite a bit of Jinx in that expression. She jumps into Silco's arms really hard in this really nice fluid arc. Even the rainwater follows behind in an arc, and her leg coming behind there with some follow through and continuing on when she lands. Her leg lands a few frames after the rest of her. Her desperation is apparent in how aggressively and hard she jumped into his arms, and we get the weight and impact of that with that follow through on her limbs, the motion blur as she leaps through the air, the water coming off after her in a trail. Obviously the timing and spacing with that slow moment of anticipation and gathering her energy to jump speeds up into the air, and that rebound as they both bounce when they hit the floor. He has no chance to push her away or deflect her, and he gets bowled right over and drops the knife, which slides away, and that's the second he's been disarmed both literally and figuratively. I don't think anyone has ever needed him so desperately and innocently like that, so he's been taken by total surprise. He probably expected her to recoil from him when she saw it was him, but she did the complete opposite. His crew's looking down at them like, what the fuck is happening? They don't know how to react. Nobody's ever attacked Silco with a hug, so they're waiting for a cue from him. Then Powder says, she left me. And Silco's looking down at her in shock. His eyes are wide open and his body language is still distancing him from her. His arms are still back supporting him as he landed, shoulders back, neck strained back. His line of action is very much pointing away from her. But then as she says those words, he takes a deep breath and his eyes move up to the body behind her, which you know is Vander's body. And if you know the history between him and Vander was like a brother to him and betrayed him and left him and actually tried to kill him. So he's felt that betrayal from a sibling, a person he loved and trusted, and that person's now lying there dead in front of him. And he also knows that Vander was like a dad to Powder, so he knows Powder's completely alone now, having been abandoned and betrayed by her sister, which he relates to. It's like when she says that he's taken back to his experience and hurt with Vander. In the next close-up, his changes in expressions are so subtle, but they say so much. He's looking at Vander's body and blinks, and you can see his eyebrows change slightly with that blink, and the muscles in his brow tense, and when his eye opens again, the lids are slightly more closed, which shows sadness and empathy with her pain. This is a huge contrast to the very blank expression he had when he first walked up to her. This is so full of emotion. There are some eye dots as he thinks about his experiences and his empathy for Powder, and he's starting to think about how this changes changes things for him. Because before, he didn't give two shits about her, but now suddenly he actually feels something for her. When Powder says, "She is not my sister anymore," you can see that's the final nail in the coffin for him on what he's going to do with Powder, and his expression and body language changes quite a lot. His eyes move down in her direction, so he's been taken out of his introspection by the pain he has in her denial of Vi as a sister anymore, and focuses more on her. He tilts his head down to her and purses his mouth because he knows exactly what she's feeling, and he feels a kinship with her now, with that betrayal and the anger that he hears coming through in Powder's voice as a result of it. So he stares down at her in shock for a while, and then shifts and raises his hand, and as an audience, we're still not quite sure what he's doing, especially at this close-up of his hand, because it actually looks a bit ominous. Because the hand is above us, which makes us feel smaller and more vulnerable, because Powder is totally at his mercy. And the hand opens, almost as if he's about to slap the shit out of her or grab her by the scruff of her neck and rip her off of him. And then we see his crew also just watching, not knowing what the hell he's going to do next, waiting for some indication from him. And then his arm comes down, around and over her really gently, and he brings his other arm around her, and you can see his legs also sort of encompass her protectively. His shoulders and head bend down, like he wants to shield her with his whole body, because he really does feel bad for her and wants to protect her from the pain he felt. It's actually really sweet, this moment. And when he says, "It's okay, we'll show them," you see again by his expression, the way his eyebrows turn up at the inner corners, he's feeling bad for her, trying to comfort her. And when he says, "We'll show them all," his anger sets in. Anger for himself and what happened to him, and anger for Powder and what Vi did to her, and also anger at what the upper class has done to the people of Zorn and all the loss that they've had to endure. And you see by the way his brow lowers, his voice deepens, the corners of his mouth turn down, and his other arm comes up over to completely cover her. And then her head turns and we see just her red eye peeking out from his embrace. And now we know the tables have turned. Powder is with Silco now. That's why we see her eye framed like this through his arm. She's his now. And it's not the clear, innocent eye of Powder, it's the ravaged, bloodshot, tear and rage-filled eye of Jinx, who has reached a turning point and has decided to let her anger over her perceived betrayal fester and grow under that of Silco's. We know from that very ominous shot that bad shit's gonna happen with these two unstable, angry, toxic people latching onto one another because they can relate to each other and feed off of each other's negative emotions. Then in this next shot, we see them silhouetted by the flames in the background. Silco still bowed over Jinx, his crew standing around them. She's one of them now, and they're gonna make the world burn. The camera pulls out slowly with this black framing, and it's like a descent into madness or hell. Very symbolic for Jinx's mental state and the path she'll now be following with Silco. She's kind of fallen into a black hole of anger and instability. Obviously, Arcane is the kind of show where you could spend literally days dissecting all the finer points, the visual storytelling, the animation, every single little component of it, because it is just completely riveting, but I'm gonna have to stop there. Since this animation analysis stuff has proven pretty popular with you guys, a lot of people have said that you found a lot of value in it and you've learned a lot. I am gonna continue doing animation analysis for other animated, content like series and movies and stuff like that, in amongst my other content that I do currently do, so don't worry, I'm not gonna stop doing that. But I am going to continue with animation analysis stuff here and there, so stick around and subscribe if you want to see more of that. Thanks as always to my patrons, the OGs who've been with me from the very beginning, as well as all the new ones. I really, really appreciate it so much, and you guys make it possible for me to be able to put the amount of time and effort into these videos as what I do. I really appreciate all the interactions and chats that we have and all the support that you give me. So that's it for today's video. Thanks for watching, guys. Love ya. Bye!